The winter solstice tide is here, the darkest time on the wheel of the year. With shortest days and longest nights, we focus on our inner light. With the rebirth of our sun, a brand new cycle has now begun. We bid the passing year farewell and cast our hopeful new year spell. Whether we live on desert sand or a sparkling winter wonderland, amid the darkness or the snow, we keep the light within aglow. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this winter solstice / Yule bucket list. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year, not just as 8 specific days on the calendar, but as literally splitting up the year into 8 different seasons, each that are about 6 weeks long. So this liberates us from the idea that we have to cram all of our magical ideas into one specific day, or even just that weekend or that week that's closest to the Sabbath itself. And it gives us permission to make our entire season feel magical, and it allows us the space and the sustainability in our schedule to actually have time to embody the most magical and powerful themes of each season in our everyday lives. So of course, since this is the Writing Witch channel, the first tip is of course to do your seasonal journaling. For each of the 8 seasons on the witch's calendar, I like to pick 3 main themes for each one of those and turn them into journal prompts. The winter solstice, aka Yule or midwinter, is the shortest day and longest night of the year, celebrated around December 22nd. Regardless of what part of the world, which spiritual path, or which historical tradition we look at, just about the whole of the human race seems to agree that the coldest, darkest time of the year holds an inherent sacredness. It makes perfect sense during this time of year when the sun seems to be at its weakest and the earth is hibernating that we would spend the long evenings indoors, celebrating that which keeps us warm, cozy, and alive. The 3 themes I like to focus on most this time of year are rebirth, generosity, and the light in the darkness. In this video, I'm sharing with you just some of my favorite fun traditions for the season, but for a much deeper dive into these themes and how to incorporate them into both your magical and your mundane aspects of your life this season to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video I did last year, which will pop up on the screen at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join us in the Writing Witch Coven, where we're doing our early winter seasonal living challenge to stay consistent in our witchy seasonal living lifestyle. We're working with these themes to embody them in our own lives in ways that are truly beneficial to us as individuals. Your membership will also include access to these lovely information sheets and prompt pages that I've designed for the season, including printable versions and physical copies mailed to your door. To learn more and sign up, I invite you to check out the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below. The next tip is to make a wreath. Making a Yule wreath is not only a beautiful way to connect with the winter season, but it also allows you to tap into the ancient traditions of wreath making. In ancient times, wreaths were carefully crafted using plants that held symbolic and magical properties for blessings and protection. By creating your own Yule wreath, you can infuse it with your own intentions and magical energy, making it a powerful symbol of hope and resilience for the winter season. Plus, it's a fun and creative activity that you can do yourself or with loved ones. To me, the midwinter wreath in particular has a beautiful sense of symbolism. Not only does the circular shape represent the continuing cycle of life and the wheel of the year itself, but the fact that we make the winter wreath out of evergreen branches makes it even more meaningful. The evergreens are a powerful symbol of eternal life that reminds us that no matter how cold or dark or barren the land may seem to be, Mother Earth is still alive, simply in a state of rest. It reminds us that even if we're going through a dark time in our lives, or if we need more rest and can't be as active all the time, we too are going through cycles. We're alive within and preparing for new growth in the new year. I love making wreaths, and it's such a relaxing and creative craft that allows me to get out of my head and into my playful inner child's crafty mode. You can make a wreath using natural materials from your environment, or even with things you get from the florist. But if you'd prefer to make something that can last year after year and be part of future midwinters to come, it can still be magical to use artificial greenery. Personally, I like to use a mix of artificial and real, preferably properly dried foliage that will preserve well. And here's a tip if you're not very crafty, or if you want to bring the magic of the natural elements into your home each winter without having to make a whole new wreath from scratch. Make or buy a simple artificial evergreen wreath and then simply stick sprigs of real plants and herbs into it to temporarily spruce it up for the season. See what I did there? Spruce, evergreen. Spruce is a type of evergreen. Anyway, this trick works really well for decorating your tree as well. I was not raised with Christmas or Yule in my family, so when I first found my witchy path in adulthood, I wanted to do things right, so to say, with natural evergreen plants in my home. So my first Yule tree was just a crappy hand-me-down little artificial tree that my partner at the time's mom gave us just so we would have a little something at our place. And I made it feel like a real tree by stuffing it with real evergreen sprigs that magically manifested in front of my city apartment building at the time. Well, I count it as a manifestation anyway. It just so happened that my neighbor trimmed their evergreen hedges at that perfect time for me to literally spruce up my tree. And now I've made a tradition out of bringing some kind of real evergreen that I foraged from outside into my Yule decorations every year. The next tip is to try your hand at a Yule log intention setting spell. On a similar note to the wreath and the tree, there's the tradition of the Yule log. Now, the Yule log is another ancient tradition with mysterious origins. We don't know exactly where it came from, but it's believed that the Yule log was originally a Nordic tradition where a large log was burned to celebrate the winter solstice. The log was decorated with holly, ivy, and other winter foliage, and was large enough to be burned for 12 days. This is potentially where we got the idea for the 12 days of Christmas. Today, many people still celebrate the Yule log tradition by burning a log in their fireplace or creating a Yule log cake. Now, one thing about my magical path is that, well, I'm a bit of a pyro. My moon is in Aries, and nothing warms my little wild heart more than burning shit. So when I learned that there were magical traditions that involved fire, well, you can say it really lit me up. The Yule log has been one of those things in my witchy path that has always excited and motivated me and helped me manifest my dreams, believe it or not. You see, when I first learned about the magical history and traditions of the Yuletide season, I lived in a city apartment with no ability to have a fire of any kind besides just candles. I did a mock-style Yule log that year, where I brought a log inside to place inside my unusable Victorian fireplace, which I was using as my altar at the time. I surrounded it with candles to represent fire and set the intention that one day I would be in a position to burn a real Yule log. Well, the following year, my wish came true. I was unexpectedly presented with the opportunity to temporarily move into a home with a yard where I could have an outdoor fire whenever I wanted. That year, I did a lot of fire magic all year round, but around the Yule time, I did a really fun Yule log spell where I found a pine log in my neighborhood and went on a hunt in my yard to find natural trimmings to decorate it with. I tied it with juniper from the garden along with pine cones and ivy and anything else I could find that was still growing, which interestingly included the garden thyme plant that I had planted that summer, which for some reason was still able to be alive underneath the snow. I didn't know that was possible until then. But thyme is a magical plant that represents protection and cleansing and clearing, so it was perfect to add to this New Year intention setting spell. And then to turn it into what I, as a writing witch, see as a more powerful version of a spell, I made a ritual out of writing my desires for the year on some of my magical handmade spell paper. Then I folded the page and stuffed it with magical herbs that aligned with my intention, along with a sparkler for good pyro measure, and I tied them to the log as well. So to activate the spell, I burned this magical log in my outdoor fireplace for a Yule that I would always remember. The following year, I did have to move back to a city apartment style lifestyle again, and I missed my magical fires greatly. Ever since then, one of my biggest goals was to manifest a life where I could have fires freely again. And wouldn't you know it, this year I finally can. I've just recently moved into a new home with a yard, and I definitely plan on doing this spell again, so stay tuned. But that being said, last year, when I did still live in an apartment, I did do a tutorial video on how to enjoy the magic of a Yule fire spell, even if you live in an apartment. This tutorial goes way above and beyond the usual suggestions, which are to make a Yule log cake or to simply place candles around a symbolic log. All you need are a pine cone, some magical ingredients of your choice, and somewhere you can sneak off to be a little bit of a pyro. In my case, I had an outdoor patio at the time, and even though I wasn't technically allowed to have a grill or a fireplace out there, I was able to burn small things in my cauldron occasionally at night when no one was watching. Usually just petition papers, things that would go up in smoke pretty quickly and be done with. But last year, there was a massive blizzard that snowed everyone in for Christmas. The snow had accumulated on my patio in just such a way that it completely shielded me from sight. Not that anyone was out there paying attention anyway. So I took advantage of this happy accident and built myself an enchanting snow cave and imagined that I was a snow fairy or a cottage witch somewhere off in a magical wood. But since pine wood burns so quickly and pine cones are so small, you could definitely take this Yule cone somewhere outside away from your apartment to burn it relatively fast. Another option that I've never tried myself, but might be really fun, is to go to a park where there's a structural grill or fireplace and burn your Yule log or your Yule cone there. At one of my local parks, there are these little awnings that people use for family barbecues and things like that, and they have built-in grills that you could totally have a little fire in if you are willing to brave the cold. You could bring hot chocolate in thermoses and make a whole thing out of it if you wanted to. For the full details on how I do my Yule log spells, I invite you to get access to the lovely grimoire pages I created for this ritual when you join me in the Writing Witch Coven over on Patreon. So last year this time, my top tier patrons and I did this spell together, but in honor of the festive season this year and how far the Patreon coven has grown, I want to evoke that generosity and say thank you by offering this page set to all patrons on all tiers. So all current patrons and all new patrons who sign up before January 1st, 2024 will receive physical copies of the Yule log grimoire pages in their monthly magical mail parcel from me, plus 20 free items from the Writing Witch shop. And of course, one of the best things to do this time of year is to decorate an altar for the season or just decorate your entire space. If you haven't already, create a Yule altar in your home. This can be a small table or shelf where you can display candles, crystals, and other items that represent the winter solstice to you, as well as the return of the sun. Add items like pine cones, holly, and mistletoe to your altar to represent the winter season. And if you're like me, you're probably going to want to use some kind of sun symbolism. Actually, for all of my seasonal altars, I let the centerpiece be this giant sun candle holder that I've had since I was a teenager, and I just create the rest of the altar around that. You can also add a Yule log or a wreath to bring in those plants of the season that we talked about. And take time to sit at your altar, meditate, and set your intentions for the new year. If, like me, you can't craft your Yule log outdoors because your fingers cease to work in the cold, your indoor altar can be a great place to do the crafting and journaling parts of the spell before heading outside to burn it. But personally, I like to kind of make my entire home into one big altar to the season. As a home and hearth witch, my home is my magical sanctuary, so whenever possible, I go all out with meaningful decorations so that my surroundings mimic the magic of the season we're in. The next tip is to go outside and observe. So even if you're like me and there's a very good chance that you're in the middle of a blizzard right now, I still like to challenge myself to just step outside, whether it's for an actual nature walk or if it's just to stand out there for a few minutes and just experience what nature is doing during this coldest and darkest time of the year. Are you looking for a simple, free, and meaningful way to connect with the winter solstice without even necessarily letting anyone know that you're celebrating the pagan Yule? Why not just take a winter nature walk? I know, if you live in a cold environment like me, easier said than done, but it's totally worth it sometimes to bundle up in warm clothes and head outside to enjoy the crisp air and beautiful winter scenery, even if it's only for a few minutes. Look for signs of the winter season, like icicles, snowflakes, and animal tracks. I also like to see what plant life I can spot, like red winter berries, ivy leaves, or other evergreens, or even just noticing the beautiful textures of the dead plants that are outside. Like on the day that I'm recording this, it's still my first week in my new home and I'm still observing the nature that's around me. And in the field outside of my window of my office, I noticed that our first accumulating snowfall landed on this field of what to me before just looked like a bunch of brownness across the street. But once the snow fell, I noticed that they were beautiful dried thistles that looked really beautiful with a layer of ice over them. Sometimes seasonal living is just about observing the beauty that's around us and finding ways to see the magical in the mundane by simply being a little bit more mindful and paying closer attention and appreciating what it is that's around us. Take this time on your walk to reflect on the past year and set some intentions for the new year while enjoying the peace and tranquility of nature. Walking in nature has been shown to reduce stress and improve mental health, making it a perfect activity for the winter season when being cooped up and having a lack of sunlight may have led to some seasonal depression. So grab a friend or go solo and take a winter walk to connect with the beauty of the season. This is also a great way to find magical gifts from Mother Nature to put on your altar, in your decor, or in your Yule log spell. Like when I found those evergreen clippings in my old neighborhood to add to my first tree. This year, I've just moved into a much more natural area, and I want to celebrate by gathering items from my new environment and bringing them inside to celebrate starting the new year in this new place where I'll be able to connect with nature all the more. And if you're someone who believes in connecting literally or symbolically with the spirits of nature or the spirits of the land you're on, this is a great way to do that. Whether you're collecting things to bring into your home or just observing and appreciating what you see on your walk, nature is always my first and most basic go-to for connecting with the true essence of any seasonal Sabbath. And of course, one of my favorite things to do is to just watch my favorite Christmassy movies. Now, if you've caught any of the other 6 videos in this series, you recall that I had a whole list of favorite magical witchy movies for every other season. But honestly, this, what most people would call the most magical time of the year, is one of the hardest ones for me when it comes to witchy movies. Like, does anyone actually know of any movies that really embody the witchy or pagan side of the Yuletide season? Since this time of year is so bombarded with the mainstream Christmas movies, it seems like that's what most of us end up watching. I didn't even grow up celebrating Christmas, but even my Muslim family loved us some Home Alone. I also love classics like The Nutcracker, A Christmas Carol, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and The Snowman. Heck, I've even learned to enjoy some of the cheesy made-for-TV or made-for-streaming services movies that come out this time of year when looking for something festive to watch. But my long-running favorite would have to be The Snow Queen. It's one of those old Hallmark artisan movies from the early 2000s that brought old fairy tales to life and inspired so much of my creative childhood mind. It isn't really Christmassy or witchy, it just personifies the magic of the seasons in a sort of folkloric fairy tale type of way. But what are your recommendations for the magical Yuletide films? Let me know, because I'm always open to new ideas on that. Next, I invite you to try some kind of mulled wine or glögg or wassail, or even just a non-alcoholic mulled cider of some kind. So I have a confession to make. I'm obsessed with cider and wine and spices. I play with combinations of these things all year round in various shapes and forms, but this season is truly the season if ever there was one. For me, this is a sort of continuation of the themes of the autumn time, the abundance of the harvest and alchemizing the gifts of the earth into something that can last through the winter and possibly even be transformed into something greater than the sum of the parts. So I always love learning about the traditional foods and drinks of this time of year when the natural human instinct has long been to feast on the richest delicacies left over from the year's bounty. Mulled ciders, wines, wassails, and clogs are basically just another excuse to bring out the cauldron and conjure up a witch's brew. If you're one for following recipes, I recommend looking up recipes for traditional wassail and glögg, or even any modern mulled wine or cider concoctions. But if you're like me, well, I still recommend learning the history and traditional ingredients of such things, but then feel free to just borrow ideas for inspiration for your very own concoction. I'm a strong believer in using whatever you have available and intuitively brewing up something that feels and tastes like the vibe you're trying to evoke for the season. And if you keep the magical properties of the winter spices in mind, this becomes all the more magical. So if you'd like to know more about that, I actually just wrote a whole magical article for that for Starlight Magazine. So if you haven't heard, Starlight Magazine is a seasonal publication that comes out 4 times a year, and it's by my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow. I have been blessed to be a contributor to this magazine regularly since it started back in 2021, and I think my very first one was actually a winter one, so this is kind of a full circle moment. But this year, I wrote all about the magical plants and herbs of winter, specifically ones that you have access to and you can work with in practical and magical ways by just bringing in a little bit of mindfulness to your holiday cooking and holiday crafting. If you would like to read this article along with several other amazing articles by other diverse witches in the community who have magical ideas about this time of year, I invite you to grab your copy. And I want to say thank you so much to anyone who has already purchased a copy through my affiliate link. That always helps me so much, and I am so grateful that more people get to experience the magic that not just myself, but all these other magical witches who contribute to the magazine have to share with the world. It's one of my favorite things this time of year to cozy up with a Starlight Magazine and a cup of hot cocoa and just learn a little bit of something new or a new perspective on something I already knew about this magical time of year. If you're interested in other things like astrology, herbs, crystals, recipes, gods, goddesses, or even secular witchcraft, all of these things can be found in Starlight Magazine through the diverse group of writers. So if that is something you're interested in, I invite you to check out my affiliate link, which is on the screen and down below. And if you're like me and you love having a physical book or magazine to turn the pages of the old-fashioned way, then I invite you to join my newsletter list. Typically, Starlight Magazine's physical copies sell out very, very quickly, so I always make sure that I let my newsletter subscribers know right away as soon as it comes out. By the time these YouTube videos come out is once I've already received my physical copy in the mail, had time to get some videos of it, and then had time to edit the video and get it out to you, by which time typically only digital copies remain, which are still absolutely worth having because the articles are amazing, and if you're someone who is a minimalist and you're not into creating physical products unnecessarily, that is definitely the option for you. But in any case, I would love to have you on the newsletter list because we do all kinds of magical stuff over there, as well as having first dibs as soon as things are available. Now that being said, I have probably never quite made the exact same Yule brew twice, and that's part of the fun. Some years I was snowed in and had to get creative with whatever ingredients I happened to have on hand. Other times I've intentionally added things to my shopping cart that I wanted to try adding, whether for its flavor, traditional value, or magical properties, or all of the above. The possibilities are endless, and as with all things, stir it clockwise and speak or think your intentions or incantations over it to make it a little drinkable potion for prosperity in the new year. The next tip is to find a cozy fireplace to sit by. So this tip is similar to the one about the Yule log, but slightly different. This tip is mainly for those of us who don't have the luxury of a real working fireplace or wood-burning stove inside our homes. It's really only for the past few generations that it's become uncommon for everyday people like us to have access to the simple human behavior of sitting by the fire. It's both a mundane and magical thing, depending on how you look at it. It was one of the simplest and most basic things that made humans human for thousands of years. And yet now, for some of us, it's become a rare and magical experience to get together around a flame with loved ones, stories, or even just a good book. In the olden days, around the fire was where everything happened, especially during this cold, dark time of the year. And a big part of my spiritual practice is just getting to honor the elements in simple ways, like perhaps our ancestors might have done regularly on a daily basis. So I have a yearly tradition of finding some way to sit by a burning fireplace at least once in this season. As a kid, I have fond memories of gathering by the big fireplace in the park casino above the local toboggan hill with my family to warm up between sledding ventures. I always loved not just the warmth and enchanting lighting, but also the smell of the firewood and the chattering of other humans gathering around it. In recent years, my partner and I have looked around town for restaurants and pubs that tend to have lit fireplaces during this time of year, and trying to get seating as close to those fireplaces as we possibly can. You may know someone who has a working fireplace whom you may wish to visit with this season. Or you might even be a lucky person like my mom who actually has one that you've yet to clean out and learn how to use. Or if you're feeling fancy, you might even be able to rent an Airbnb that has a working fireplace just to get that experience. This time of year is the perfect motivation to challenge yourself to find a fireplace, even if it means getting outside of your usual routines and trying something new or different. It gets to be fun. And my next tip is to incorporate some kind of sun symbolism into your altar or your decorating scheme. One of the simplest ways to get back to basics and peel back the layers of cultural connotations down to the most core level meaning of this time of year is to focus on sun symbolism. For most pagans, the real reason for the season, in its most basic and ancient form, is the veneration of the sun itself. Before the winter solstice became the birth of the Son of God, it was the birth of the sun god. If we look back far enough in any culture, all religious belief and tradition stems back to the simple appreciation of the dance between the earth and the sun, and how those are the things that keep us alive as human beings. In this season that encompasses the shortest days and longest nights of the year, we're naturally called to think of the source of the warmth and light that allows us and our environment to live and grow. This season of the rebirth of the sun is also the season of the new year for a good reason. It's an invitation to say out with the old and in with the new as we allow the baggage of the old year to die with the sun and our new selves to be reborn with the sun on the solstice. For this reason, I have a personal tradition of topping my solstice tree not with a Star of Bethlehem or an angel, but instead with the sun. And whether or not I happen to be able to see the sunset through the gray clouds, I salute it by gazing into it, thanking it, wishing it a happy birthday, and allowing its light to cleanse and recharge my energy. Especially this time of year when so many of us are suffering from lack of vitamin D and potentially some seasonal depression, it's the perfect time to soak up the sun's rays with intention whenever possible. Sometimes it's a good way to stay grounded in a little bit of a daily gratitude ritual by remembering to pause and be grateful every time that we notice the sun shining on us. It's also the perfect season for sun gazing for practical reasons, because staring directly into the sun would be far more dangerous to our eyes any other time of the year. During the sunset around this time of year, I like to stare straight at the sun and feel that magic and power penetrating my soul. I don't know how safe it's supposedly considered to be, but a long time ago I learned about this practice of sun gazing and to do it mindfully, do it intuitively, do it safely, but it is something that I like to do particularly this time of year to really soak up the sun's energies and that vitamin D for just a few seconds a day. When the sun is so dim and far away, I find that it's the perfect amount of light to burn through my energetic baggage without burning out my retinas. So to dive even deeper into my 3 favorite themes for this season, I invite you to check out this video right here from last year, where I'm not only sharing with you my 3 favorite journal prompts and also giving you some tips on how to incorporate those themes into your life to maximize your fulfillment this season, but I'm also actually answering the journal prompts in the video. So you can actually see examples from my real life as they're happening of how I'm able to take these powerful themes of the season and actually embody them in a way that allows me to experience more fullness and freedom and fun in my everyday life, regardless of what's going on. So I invite you to check that one out, and I'll see you there.